all so much for taking the time to come see me today. My name is Ross Prolic, and forgive the title, but this is going to be a little bit of a different talk than I think what most might be used to at a cybersecurity conference. But I really got into thinking about this, and it was just a general interest piece for me. But I really noticed a ton of similarities that exist between libraries and information security work, and I just thought I'd talk about it a little bit. So first off, just another quick note, if anyone wants to take pictures of the slides or the resources along the way, please feel free. I don't mind it at all. So who am I? What do I do? I grew up in the Denver area with my later childhood and adolescent years in Belvedere, Illinois, and now I live in Chicago. So sorry if anyone in Wisconsin in here. There's no beef, I promise you. You know, as a kid, I was part of a generation that was half analog and half digital. My memories were that of playing SNES, playing baseball in the field behind the school, waiting to call my friends because my older brother was on the internet, or helping my dad try to fix things around the house, which we usually ended up breaking further. In my small town, there really wasn't a whole lot to do, so I often spent a lot of time at the library. One thing I was always fascinated by was the ability for the librarians to kind of find anything that was out there, whether it was in their collections or not. So for what I do, I'm currently a law librarian. I hold a Master's of Library and Information Science from the University of Illinois. Essentially, I had a long spiel about things that I do in my professional life, but essentially what I do is a lot of OSINT, open source research, some closed source research. I get a lot of weird questions, essentially, and I have to figure out how to answer that. So outside of that, I actively seek opportunities to learn and volunteer with organizations that focus on OSINT. And that is all to say, I'll share my contact information at the end, and if anyone wants to discuss anything further or wants the slides, please feel free to reach out and keep in touch. So, I'm sorry, we'll add a little bit more there. Throughout my professional life thus far, one thing has become clear. While the knowledge that is in our heads is incredibly important, it's increasingly about whether you can find the answer and how accurate that answer is. As I've become more in tune with the world of information security, I've found a surprising number of similarities between those in that world and those in the GLAM world, both in ethos and in practice. And if anyone's not familiar with GLAM, that's government, libraries, archives, and museums. So first off, I would have to say that I've noticed that truth and transparency for the public good are core tenets for both groups. Quick Google search and you'll see all kinds of headlines recently about attempts to ban books and restrict the ability for advocacy groups to assist those libraries and especially public libraries. This is a broad topic and it's really difficult to do it justice. But the counterparts in the InfoSec world would have to be organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Muck Rock Foundation, and organizations that advocate for a free and open internet and government. I found one story particularly funny. Every year, the Electronic Frontier Foundation gives out an award they call the Foily. This year, it went to the Augusta County Sheriff's Office. They were trying to hide or otherwise obfuscate their records by placing the tag of no FOIA either in the email subject line or the headline of the document. Once EFF found out about this, that this was an internal practice, they just requested all the documents with that tag, which is especially funny. The full story is in my resources if you wanted to look at that. There are many examples of organizations that fight censorship in various ways, and I don't have time to enumerate them all. But I love that both groups do prioritize truth. I also tried to find an image for this slide, but searching for any meme with censorship was a bit of a minefield, so I kind of decided against that. So moving on, digital privacy is something that I care deeply about. I know that my personal data was in the OPM data breach of 2015, and also probably in the very recent AT&T data breach, which would happen to explain the flood of spam calls that I've been getting pretty much incessantly for a couple of months now. I would say that both groups help people in different ways. Librarians help individuals take more agency in protecting their personal information, while the InfoSec pros are kind of more hands-on in the task of monitoring, defending, and testing. In the process of researching this talk, I discovered more organizations than I would have expected who offer training, seminars, and even provide resources in some cases that assist people in protecting their information online. I have a couple of links up in case anyone wants to check those out. And the Consumer Reports article kind of highlights many different options that are publicly available. It is also definitely worth mentioning task-based resources that people can utilize to protect their information online. I don't mean to sound like I'm advertising for anybody here, but operationprivacy.com is truly free and is an extensive list of privacy-focused tools and tasks that people can use to secure their internet-facing profile. It's essentially a libguide for digital privacy, and those exist too. There's one up there, the libguides.up.edu/DPC. That one's particularly thorough. I would recommend checking that out if you're interested. All right, so free and open source software, this one's a little bit more esoteric, and excuse me one second. This one's a little bit more esoteric, as everything costs money in one way or the other. However, the spirit of both of these groups is that access to and security of information should be free. Think of how many tools on GitHub or frameworks that you can use for information that are openly available and accessible by a few keystrokes or clicks of the mouse. This is something that is also true of libraries for the most part. While yes, you will likely need a library card to check out books, either electronically or in print. And some other services also require membership. However, it's still very much true that if you are simply seeking information for almost any need, all you need to do is pick up a phone or write an email and you'll have that. I have to do this once or twice a month for something that's just not in my records or something that is not publicly available online. Just takes a simple phone call to the librarian at the organization that has the records I need, and usually have it within an hour or two. And I have to say as well, so many people in the information security world are just as generous with their time and resources, and I speak from personal experience on that one. So this is just a little bit of a continuation here. I won't explain each one, as I'm sure very many of you are familiar with these, but I just wanted to highlight that these are all publicly available and free to use as an integral piece of any security program. MITRE is a great intelligence and knowledge management platform, and the same with OWASP. I was actually impressed by CISA's list as well. Sorry for the link blob. Once again, feel free to take pictures or contact me afterwards. I'm happy to send this out to you. And of course, Metasploit. It's an interesting, I don't know anything about the guy that created that, but if anybody does, please let me know. Be cool to meet him. So professional similarities here. When we talk about this in this world, it's the library's reference desk is really a close comparison with OSINT and many other intelligence subspecialties. It's the quintessential issue of information access, retrieval, and dissemination amongst collaborative working groups. One of my textbooks for one of my core classes in my graduate program taught a methodology for going about answering any questions or information needs. Oddly enough, it reads like a lot of the resources that I've used to develop my skills in open source intelligence. There are certainly differences, often in the urgency and nature of the work, but research methodologies often go hand in hand with intelligence and analysis. And much like in OSINT, it's just often a matter of discovering where that record may be stored and how to retrieve it. While the reference desk certainly has paid database subscriptions for ease of use, speed, and consistency, much like there are enterprise-level tools that organizations use, there exists plenty of free and open access products. I would even argue that most anything can be found through freely available sources. It's just a matter of whether you have the time and energy to do the legwork. But backing up a little bit, before this whole process begins, something really important needs to happen, and that's we need to understand what we're looking for or what goals we're trying to accomplish. So in the process of researching this talk, I actually stumbled upon a podcast episode that Tracy Malif, who is known as InfoSec Sherpa on most social media, was featured in. Tracy is actually a former librarian and brought up a really key tool, an instrument that librarians use, and how it translated to working in the information security world. So first off, we have approachability, or Or are all parties involved willing and capable of effectively communicating potential security issues and their implications? Or do people feel empowered to bring those potential issues to management and stakeholders? Second, we have interests, or are those with decision-making authority invested in improving processes and resolving issues? I think it's an underrated step in the process, but it's way more impactful than most people think. Listening and inquiring, this is essentially objective scoping, and where the communication of what is needed is refined and clarified. Much like kickoff meetings for an engagement or establishing a service level agreement. This is probably the most important part of the reference interview, as it allows for a focused search, and it keeps all parties centered and on task. Searching is fourth. This is essentially the legwork here, the collecting and analyzing information and resources, or on the other side, monitoring, testing, patching, assessing, etc. And finally, we have the follow-up, or ensuring that results are reported and that the needs of the information seeker or client have been met, much like the consultant's report or process testing. While the reference interview specifically is client-facing and mirrors many of the workflows that security folks are familiar with, the nuts and bolts of information science also function much the same way. First, we have to scrutinize the sources that we use, especially when it comes to any sort of open source information. Things like, where is this information coming from? Is it from a single author? Is it multiple authors? Is it not attributed to an individual? What weight does this carry in the project? And this is especially important as it will often dictate how much the information is scrutinized. How we analyze and interpret information is also subject to numerous cognitive biases. A really good book to read if you're curious on the topic is The Psychology of Intelligence and Analysis by Richard Hoyer. Moving on, we have, how do we verify the information that we are collecting is accurate? And conversely, how do we debunk MDM, misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation? And that's another similarity, as we also know that stands for mobile device management. Gotta love the acronyms. But my favorite example of this recently was the story of 3 million Bluetooth-enabled toothbrushes that were responsible for some DDoSing. Obviously not true, but pretty funny. And then finally, ephemerality. Especially in OSINT and in Tracelabs, preserving information that is part of your case or to be submitted for points on your report is a challenge that will never go away. And especially incorporating note-taking systems into a workflow. And this kind of leads us into our next topic, knowledge management. Knowledge management is one of those high-level topics that librarians spend a lot of time studying. And it's really interesting to me because it's something that just about every worker has a system for, but no one ever really knows that there's a term for it, and that it's a challenge that people are actively working on solutions to. The biggest question is, how do we turn the knowledge that is in our heads, otherwise known as tacit knowledge, into knowledge that is written down, explicit knowledge, in a way that makes sense to all of us, that is the least disruptive to our workflow. This diagram was in one of the articles that I found, and I think it's a really helpful visual to kind of visually represent knowledge transferring through different mediums. We all know it's imperative for organizations to have documentation, especially to build institutional knowledge should an employee be out sick, leave for a new opportunity, any other reason that knowledge needs to be shared in an organization. Ideally, documenting as much of what is relevant to our professional lives would be written down somewhere, but it's also a balancing act as that process itself takes time and can interrupt our workflow. I'm also really sorry if you thought I had answers to any of these questions, because I don't. So some key challenges of knowledge management, and I'll go quick here because I know I have to watch my time. But first, people don't think in folder structure. Unfortunately, though, it's often the best way to categorize information in the long term, at least in a format that's going to be stable and readable. So while our tried and true file structures have always been that way, it is tricky to have that translate to the way people think and make connections in their minds. Note-taking has certainly come a long way, and there are note-taking platforms that organize knowledge in a link-based format to visually represent connections. And some examples of these, that are off the top of my head are Maltego, Obsidian, Xmind is also a good one. And then second, an operational struggle of knowledge management, particularly within organizations, is how to maintain these sources. Anytime someone says, oh, that's out of date, or I don't know who maintains that Confluence page, if anybody does, it's a tremendous issue for information seekers and institutions because it erodes the trust in their systems and it makes people feel lost as to where to go next. So moving forward, not sure if this is where I'm supposed to talk about AI, but I guess everybody has to nowadays. But in theory, it can help. I know LexisNexis is really pushing their AI products right now, as is everybody. LexisNexis is a huge supplier of library databases and knowledge management services. They're used in a variety of knowledge-based industries. There are a lot of implications for everyone, but I think that for our two fields specifically, there are unique challenges and responsibilities relating to using AI in our workflows due to its current accuracy and the ethics of relying on generative AI. For example, even trying to rehearse and time check this talk, ChatGPT incorrectly tallied the word count, making me think I had about 30 minutes worth of material at first, and I was only about halfway finished with my slides. So a little bit of a shocker there. And finally, I think that this is all to say that both industries are facing a bit of an identity crisis. Even going through my master's a few years ago, there was a bit of uncertainty what the program was even about. Most of my courses focused on Python and SQL to process and design systems for more efficient information retrieval in an almost completely digital world. In fact, many schools are even thinking of dropping the word library from the name, as the program is designed to prepare people for an entirely different workplace. So I don't think that the spirit of the librarian is going to die, much like I don't think that the spirit of a hacker will die. But I think that the very near future will see pretty dramatic changes for both industries. So thank you. I actually spoke a little bit faster than I thought I was going to. But I just wanted to say first off, thank you to Michael Getzman and the rest of the CypherCon team for putting all of this on. I know it's a ton of work, and it's greatly appreciated. Which is why I also wanted to say thank you all for coming to see me today. I'm certainly not used to public speaking, but challenging yourself is difficult, and I really encourage everyone to take those chances. So I also know that I covered a lot of high-level topics that are really impossible to go into depth on in a 25-minute talk. In my case, just about 20 minutes. So please feel free to take a picture of the slide, write down my email or whatever, and reach out if you want to discuss anything further or if you want me to send you any of the resources that I used. And I'm also on LinkedIn, of course, so feel free to connect with me there. I'm happy to hear any comments or if you want to collaborate or discuss on anything in the future. Here are my references once again. Really, thank you all again so much for coming out. Does anybody need the... I'll just leave this up for a second. Oops. All right. Yeah.
Superpowers, when you work with other information security folks that are not experts in this field, that you kind of try to give good habits to like other security analysts to, include the references or that kind of thing. You think of other superpowers that, you folks work on a little bit more that aren't experts in this field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that, first off, I'm not an analyst. I'm a law librarian. What I would say to anyone to maintain good habits is to just essentially first off start a note-taking system and have that establish whatever works for you, and then just make sure that you kind of document things, and then also incremental progress I think is really key to learning. So it's not about taking on a big project and finishing that right away. I think it's more about just kind of dividing up a specific goal that you have and then just making small amounts of progress every day towards whatever it is you're working for. So. Yeah. All right, thank you all so much.